Dried fruit is just fruit with the water taken out. You've read that sentence somewhere. It's true about some of the bags on that shelf, and not true at all about the others. And nothing on the front tells you which one you're holding. Somewhere along the way you were handed a list. Apricots, prunes, figs and apples in the safe column, dates, raisins and the sweetened ones in the column you were told to leave alone. You've shopped off that list for years, carefully, and your meter never seemed to care either way. The trouble with dried fruit and blood sugar starts with the list itself. It's sorted by how sweet the fruit tastes. Your body isn't sorting by taste. It's sorting by how much sugar somebody added in a factory, and by how much fruit ends up in one handful. So here are 10 dried fruits ranked for blood sugar, safest first and riskiest last. 3 of them aren't really fruit anymore, and I'll say so when we reach them. And the one sitting at the top of the safe list everywhere else is the one I'd want you to raise with a pharmacist before you eat much of it. The 2 numbers that decide this list. Nearly every ranking sorts these by glycemic index, the standard measure of how quickly a food moves your blood sugar. 2 problems with leaning on that number. The first is the portion. A glycemic index is measured by feeding somebody 50 grams of available carbohydrate, which for dried fruit means the laboratory handed people roughly 70 grams of dates in one sitting. Nobody eats like that, and the number was never describing your handful. The second is that it wobbles. When researchers tested 63 healthy adults over and over under careful conditions, the same person's own result varied by about 20% from one day to the next, and the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition published their verdict plainly in 2016 that this is unlikely to be a good way to guide food choices. 4 separate laboratories measured the same raisins at 49, at 55, at 56, and at 61. So I'll use the index the way it survives being wrong by that much. It can tell you a 42 from a 62. It can't tell you a 49 from a 55, so nothing here is ranked on a gap that small. The order comes from 2 things the laboratory can't wobble: whether anything was added to the bag after the fruit came off the tree, and how much sugar rides in a portion you'd really eat. Call it how far each one has traveled from the fruit. There's a third that can outrank them both, and that's whatever else you happen to be taking. The top 7 are all just fruit, and they sit close together. The real gap opens at number 3, and it's a cliff rather than a step. One thing does change with age, and none of these lists mention it. Your first-hour insulin response slows as you get older, so the same handful is handled differently at 70 than it was at 40. Work the journal Diabetes published in 2006 put a figure on it, and the reading after a sugar load climbs by roughly 6 to 9 points a decade on its own. Not a reason for older adults to be frightened of a raisin, a reason to know which bag you're holding. Number 10. Prunes. Open the cupboard of almost anyone over 60, and there's a bag of these, bought on a doctor's advice, usually with a little guilt attached. You can put the guilt down. Prunes carry less sugar for their weight than anything else on this list. One pitted prune weighs about 9.5 grams and brings 6 grams of carbohydrate, only 3.5 of it sugar. 5 come to about 30 grams of carbohydrate and 3 grams of fiber. They also hold the lowest measured glycemic index of the group, tested at 29 one year and 40 another, which tells you as much about the measurement as about the prune. The ceiling on prunes is real, and it isn't the one you've been warned about. It isn't your blood sugar. It's sorbitol, a sugar alcohol the plum makes on its own, and 5 prunes carry about 7 grams of it. When 42 healthy adults were given a straight 10-gram dose of sorbitol for a study in the American Journal of Gastroenterology in 1985, 43% of one group and 55% of another got cramping and diarrhea from it. 10 prunes puts you past that dose. The number to hold on to is 5 or 6, not a bowl, and that's a digestive ceiling rather than a glucose one. One more thing if you take warfarin. 5 prunes carry about 28 micrograms of vitamin K, more than any other dried fruit here. The researchers who measured that concluded fruit doesn't destabilize warfarin, so eat roughly the same amount each week, and you've done the only thing that matters. That bag sits one shelf over from the lightest thing in this whole ranking. Number 9. Dried apples. Dried apple rings are the one item here where a quarter cup costs you less than half of what a quarter cup of almost anything else costs. That isn't a trick of the label, it's weight. A quarter cup of dried apple rings weighs only about 21 grams, where a quarter cup of raisins weighs 36, because apple rings are big and airy and they don't pack down. That's 14 grams of carbohydrate and 12 grams of sugar, against 29 and 24 for the raisins. Same measuring cup, less than half the load. There's a second reason apples measure low, and it's that not all fruit sugar is the same sugar. Fruit carries a mix of glucose, which goes into your blood quickly, and fructose, which mostly goes to your liver first and moves your blood sugar very little. In dried apple, it runs about 4 parts fructose to 1 part glucose. In raisins, it's about 1 to 1. When researchers tested that across several dried fruits for nutrients in 2018, the more fructose a fruit carried against its glucose, the lower the blood sugar went. And dried apple came out lowest of everything they fed people, at 43. Strange thing to say about something that tastes as sweet as an apple ring does, and it's the first sign your tongue is a poor guide here. Buy them unsulfured if you can, the brown wrinkled version rather than the pale one, and keep the quarter cup as your measure. Would you have guessed the apple over the raisin? Number 8. Dried figs. Here's an odd gap. 3 figs weigh about 25 grams and bring 16 grams of carbohydrate with 2.5 grams of fiber, which is more fiber than the same weight of any other everyday dried fruit. Everything about that composition says a fig should behave well, and nobody has ever properly tested it. No trial anywhere has fed people dried figs and measured their blood sugar. The single figure in the literature comes from a Greek team who measured a piece of halva made with figs, semolina, and almonds, and got 52, reported in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health in 2022. But halva is a dessert, not a fig. The honest answer to what figs do to your blood sugar is that somebody has measured the fig and nobody has measured the person eating it. A few things further down this list have never been tested in people either, but the fig is the only one where somebody measured the wrong thing. 3 figs is a portion, and if you're going to eat dried fruit alongside something else, this is the one I'd put next to a piece of cheese. Store them in the refrigerator once the bag is open, because the natural sugar crystallizes on the outside, and plenty of seniors throw away good figs thinking they've gone off. That white bloom is sugar, not mold. 2 shelves over there's a smaller, redder bag that gets recommended far more confidently than the fig does, on far less. Number 7. Goji berries. On paper, the goji berry wins this whole ranking. An ounce, about 28 grams, gives you 22 grams of carbohydrate, 13 grams of sugar, and nearly 4 grams of fiber. That's more fiber than the fig carries, and the most of anything on this shelf. That fiber is riding along with the sugar it came with, slowing the same berry's own delivery, which is the one thing none of the sweetened items further down can do. Sorted on composition alone, Goji would sit at number 10, and Prunes would move down. It doesn't, for a reason that has nothing to do with sugar. Doctors have published 2 case reports of Goji interfering with warfarin. One describes a 61-year-old woman whose INR, the measure of how thin her blood is, climbed to 4.1 after 4 days of concentrated Goji tea, then settled within a week of stopping, and it ran in Annals of Pharmacotherapy in 2001. Pharmacotherapy carried a second in 2012, a woman of 71 who turned up with nosebleeds and bruising after 4 days of Goji juice. 2 people, and case reports are the weakest evidence there is. But those authors told warfarin patients to avoid Goji drinks. and I won't argue with them over a berry nobody needs. So if you're not on a blood thinner, Goji is a good choice, and an expensive one. If you are, skip it, and the fig 2 slots back does the same job for a third of the price. 3 bags named so far. If one of them is in your kitchen right now, say which number in the comments. It's useful to know which of these people actually own. Number 6. Dried apricots. Every list puts dried apricots at the top, and on blood sugar alone that's fair. Apricots measured 42 against white bread in a crossover trial reported in Nutrition and Diabetes in 2018, the lowest of the 4 dried fruits tested that day, and the only one that still lowered the response when it replaced half the bread in a meal. That trial was paid for by the dried fruit trade, which supplied the food as well, and I'd hold it to the same standard I'll hold the raisin study to in a minute. 6 halves weigh about 21 grams and bring 13 grams of carbohydrate. On glucose, the apricot earns its reputation. 2 things sit underneath that reputation, and neither is in the Safe List articles. The first is potassium, and this is the one I said to raise with a pharmacist. Half a cup of dried apricots carries roughly 750 milligrams, more than anything else on this shelf, and for most people, that's a good thing. But a great many older adults take an ACE inhibitor or an ARB, the 2 commonest families of blood pressure tablet, or spironolactone, a water pill, and all of those nudge blood potassium up on their own. Too much of it unsettles the rhythm of your heart, and you can't feel it happening. Kidney guidance from the National Kidney Foundation in 2020 declines to set a milligram limit at all, which is a polite way of saying, nobody can hand you your number from a video. Ask the person who fills your prescriptions. The second is sulfites, the preservative that keeps them orange. California's Environmental Health Office measured around 240 parts per million in dried apricots, and about 505 in golden raisins. For nearly everyone that's nothing, and for people with asthma it isn't, since just under 4% of 203 asthmatic patients reacted when they were challenged with sulfites for a study in the American Journal of Medicine in 1986. The brown, unsulfured apricots are the same fruit without it. The apricot doesn't fall down this list, it stops being the automatic answer. Halfway down the shelf. Nothing so far has been ranked on how sweet it tastes, and 3 of the 5 still to come have actually been fed to people with type 2 diabetes while somebody watched the meter. Only one of those 3 moved the number. Number 5. Raisins. I've told you before that raisins were fine. It was in the episode on the 10 breakfast products that spike blood sugar more than dessert, where dried fruit sat at number 7, and I said it was the one item on that list I'd defend hardest. I meant it, and there's more to it than that list had room for. Raisins are the only dried fruit where somebody fed them to people with type 2 diabetes for 12 weeks, and the number actually moved. 51 patients spent 12 weeks eating 1 ounce of dark raisins before each of their 3 meals, measured against snack packs of the same calorie count, and their after-meal glucose came out about 23% lower. The physician in sports medicine reported that in 2015, their systolic blood pressure came down almost 9 points as well. Now, the 3 things that trial doesn't say, all of which matter: the fall in fasting glucose and the small drop in HbA1c, the 3-month average, did not reach statistical significance. So the headline result is about the hours after a meal and not about your next lab report. The comparison snacks were cheese crackers and thin salted crackers. So what was demonstrated is that raisins beat crackers, and the California Raisin Marketing Board paid for the study, with one of its own consultants as a co-author. None of that makes it false. It makes it a real finding, with a limit on it, and the limit is the part you can use, because raisins beating crackers is something you can act on tonight. A quarter cup weighs 36 grams and holds 29 grams of carbohydrate, 24 of them sugar, roughly a whole cup of fresh grapes compressed into something seniors finish in 40 seconds. The drying did that, not a factory. Nothing was ever added to a raisin, and nothing was added to the next one either, which is the whole trouble with its reputation. Number 4. Dates. Dates are nature's candy, so they must be the worst thing here. They're the densest, and they're also the most over-prosecuted food in this aisle. One pitted medjool weighs about 24 grams and carries 18 grams of carbohydrate, which is more per piece than anything else on this shelf. Eat two, and a good share of the day's carbohydrate has gone, for a lot of people watching. A deglet noor is a third of that size, about 5 grams of carbohydrate, so when somebody says a date, they might mean either. The prosecution rests on a glycemic index of 103, a figure that circulated for years out of an old table and would put dates above pure glucose. But the modern tables don't support it, and across 19 dried date varieties, the range runs from 43 to 75. And when researchers actually put dates in front of people and waited, very little happened in either direction. 60 grams a day for 12 weeks in people with type 2 diabetes moved HbA1c from 7.6 to 7.5, which is nothing, in a trial Nutrients published in 2022 that took no industry money at all. 3 dates a day for 16 weeks did nothing either. Dates sit at number 4 on size, not on villainy. They're counted in ones, which is where the fruit stops. Number 3. Dried pineapple, mango, and papaya. Here's the first of the 3 that aren't really fruit anymore. Pick up a bag of dried pineapple and read past the first word. Pineapple, sugar, pineapple juice, citric acid. Dried mango from one national chain lists mango, then sugar, then powdered sugar, which is itself sugar and cornstarch. Dried papaya is often just 2 words, papaya and sugar. The composition tells you what that does. A 40-gram serving of dried pineapple brings about 30 grams of sugar and under a gram of fiber. The same serving of dried mango brings 27 grams of sugar and 1 gram of fiber. Compare that with the fig, which brought 2.5 grams of fiber in a smaller portion. The fiber is the tell. When a fruit is dried and nothing else happens to it, the fiber concentrates along with the sugar, which is why prunes and figs and apples still have some. Soak a fruit in syrup, and the sugar climbs, while the fiber doesn't. You can read the distance from the fruit, straight off that one line. And buying the unsweetened mango barely helps, which surprised me. One unsweetened product declares 24 grams of sugar per 40 gram serving against 26.5 in the sweetened one. The mango was already sweet. With pineapple and papaya, the added sugar does most of the work. With mango, it mostly doesn't, and the next one isn't dried at all. Number 2. Banana chips. Banana chips are sold in the dried fruit aisle, in the same kind of bag at the same eye level, and they're a fried food. They go into hot oil, usually coconut oil, and they come out closer to a potato chip than to a piece of fruit. 1 ounce carries 9.5 grams of fat, and 8 of those grams are saturated. 8 grams of saturated fat in a small handful out of something most people file mentally as fruit. The same ounce brings 147 calories against 85 for an ounce of raisins. On blood sugar alone, banana chips aren't a disaster, and nobody has measured them, so I'm reasoning from the fat rather than from a trial. The problem is that a fried snack was sold to you as dried fruit, and if you bought it because you decided to be careful, you've been quietly overcharged. Dried banana without the fryer does exist, sold as flat, leathery slices rather than crisp coins, and the International Glycemic Index tables put it at 44. If you like banana, that's the version, and the fat line on the back is the only place the 2 products differ enough to see. That's the second of the 3 that stopped being fruit. The third is the one you've most likely been buying on purpose. Number 1. Sweetened dried cranberries. The riskiest item in this ranking started out as the least sugary fruit in the entire store. A raw cranberry carries just over 4 grams of sugar in every 100, less than a lemon. By the time it reaches you as a sweetened dried cranberry, it carries nearly 73 grams in every 100. Drying alone can't do that. Drying roughly quadruples the sugar in a grape, and that's the honest ceiling of what taking water out achieves. 17-fold isn't drying. 17-fold is a recipe. Then researchers put it in front of people and watched the meter. 13 people with type 2 diabetes were given 4 things on 4 separate days, and their blood glucose was measured each time. White bread took them to a peak of about 173 on the meter you'd read at home. Sweetened dried cranberries took them to 173 as well. A reduced sugar version of the same cranberry came in at about 157. Raw cranberries came in at about 126. The Journal of Food Science carried that trial in 2010. Same fruit, 3 different sugar loads, 3 different answers, measured in the people this video is for. The raw portion was a little larger than the dried ones, which makes the bottom number more impressive rather than less. 13 people is a small room. The gap between the first number and the last one is too wide to be an accident. 2 practical things, because this is the item people feel most tricked by, and they're right to. Organic doesn't help you here. 1 organic bag lists organic cranberries, organic sugar, and organic sunflower oil, and lands at 31 grams of sugar per quarter cup, which is more than the ordinary kind. The genuinely unsweetened dried cranberry does exist, freeze-dried and tart enough to make you blink. It isn't what the trial fed anybody, since they used the fresh berry, but it's the closest thing on a shelf to it. That's the third, and it's how far from the fruit the far end of this shelf has traveled. Before you restock the cupboard, 4 of these belong in a short conversation with whoever manages your medicines, so here are all 4 by name. If you take insulin, or a tablet like glyburide that pushes your pancreas into putting out more of its own, then swapping crackers for raisins changes the shape of your afternoon, and that's worth doing in a week when you're already checking. If potassium is something your kidneys no longer clear easily, or you take an ACE inhibitor, an ARB or spironolactone, the apricots at number 6 are the first to raise, and raisins belong in that conversation too, because they carry a little more potassium than the prunes do, and they're the thing I'm about to recommend. You can't feel high potassium. If you have asthma, the pale orange apricots and the golden raisins are the sulfited ones, and the brown versions aren't. And if prunes are already doing a job for you, keep them doing it, at around 5 or 6 a day, so the sorbitol stays helpful instead of turning into an afternoon you didn't plan. Tonight, the snack shelf. 10 bags on that shelf, and 1 decision to make about the lot of them. Tonight, when you go looking for something that isn't a meal, and the thing you were about to open was a bag of something salty, let the dried fruit have that job instead. If it was going to be an apple, keep the apple. Anything from number 10 down to number 5 will do it, and that limit matters, because a quarter cup of the cranberries at number 1 lands where the crackers did. Use the portion that item earned upstairs, so 5 or 6 prunes, 3 figs, 6 apricot halves, a quarter cup of raisins. That's the whole move, and it comes straight out of number 5. That trial didn't test raisins against fruit. It tested them against crackers. The raisins won, and the raisin growers paid for it, which is why I'd take the direction from it, and not the decimal. Nobody has shown that dried fruit beats the apple, and the population numbers lean the other way, because most of us add dried fruit to the day instead of swapping anything out for it. So it's a substitution, never an addition. Nothing gets bought, nothing gets weighed, and nothing comes off your plate. Which of these 10 had you been buying because you thought it was the careful choice? Put it underneath this video, because somebody else is standing in that aisle making the same decision this week. All 10 sit in order, on a single sheet, in the free action guide. Grams beside each one, big enough to read from across the kitchen. There's a link below, or the pinned comment if that's easier to reach. The next one is about trail mix, and what happens to all this arithmetic when the dried fruit turns up already mixed with something else. Subscribe, and you'll have it the day it goes up.